So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Tuesdays with the Diocese. Tonight is on Catholic social teaching, and our presenter is Sister Francine Swartzenberger, and she's a Dominican Sister of Peace, and she lives in Great Bend, Kansas. And Sister Francine, I'm going to invite you to share a little bit more about yourself at this time. And as people come in, I'm also going to invite you, if you would, to show your video. If for some reason you can, or you're going to be walking around, that's okay. But it's nice to see faces. So thank you so much. Sister Francine, it's all yours.
Thank you, Colleen. Well, about probably a year ago, Colleen and I and Father Bob and Father Cody were talking about the pastoral ministry program, and I brought up about Catholic social principles. And so I just said, I think our church needs our laity, everybody needs to really delve more deeply into what Catholic social teaching really is. And so in September, I think Colleen contacted me and asked if I would do one of these free 2-hour sessions. So I said, yes, I would. So I've worked on that. So tonight, that's what we're going to be doing. I am on the Heartland spirituality staff here in Great Bend. I do various things besides that. I love to garden, so I work outside a lot. I'm an organist for liturgies here, and just do a lot of other little things and big things. So this is one of my big interests, I think, because I've been involved in social kinds of work. Like I worked in a homeless shelter. I've worked with women who were coming out of homelessness. I got my degree from Iliff Seminary in Denver in social justice. So anyway, here we are. I don't want to do a long history. So thank you for signing up tonight for this 2-hour session. Catholic social principles, it's a pretty dense topic in the sense that there's no way that we can cover a lot of this material. And so I think it's sort of like an appetizer. I'll give you a little bit, and hopefully from the little bit, you might delve more deeply into it. And if you have any questions, anytime I'm presenting, just, raise your hand or let me know. So this is a learning for all of us. I don't want to be the expert. I'm not an expert. So we'll do the first screen share in here. So we're talking about Catholic social principles. And I call it our moral compass because from these principles, I think that's how our life should be lived according to the gospel. Now, that's my idea of what it means. And social means the interaction between people. So these are principles that help us live according to the gospel and how we relate to each other. In our next slide, I don't know, there seems to be a black line across that. Is that on everybody else's or just mine? Anyway, it says, being a Christian entails promoting the dignity of our brothers and sisters, fighting for it, living for it. And if anybody really lives the social principles of the gospel, I think we would have to say it is Pope Francis. As I said before, I think these principles are sort of forgotten in our church. If I would ask you, how many times have you heard anything about that in your Sunday homilies? Or how often how often do we even read about it in our Catholic papers? We get glimpses of it, when we hear Pope Francis talking about how he talks about receiving immigrants or how to live the gospel among the poor. But I think for the most part, we don't hear a lot about it. He came out with the encyclical, letter not too long ago called Laudate Deum, which follows up to Laudato Si, which is all on the environment, but we don't hear about that a lot. Anyway, so as we go along tonight, hopefully we'll hear a lot more. Anyway, I'd like to start with a prayer, and it is the Feast of Saint Joseph. And so I would offer this prayer for all of us and for our church. On this Feast of Saint Joseph, we pray, O God, that we may nourish in our hearts the courage and compassion that Joseph, foster father of Jesus, nurtured in the lives of Jesus and Mary. He listened to the guidance of the Spirit, though it took him to places that called for risk and surrender. As we study this evening the teaching, the life, and the mission of Jesus, the one he calls us to carry on, may we follow the grace that will bring about the unity for which he gave his life. Amen. I have a couple of questions. What happens when we build a four-wall house of God? Where in the gospel accounts do you read or find a quote about a doctrine of our faith? Somewhere along the way, did we buy that God is chiefly interested in religion? And where and why is it that we become so interested in saving souls? And then the question I asked before, how often do we hear about the connection between the gospel and our daily life? When you are in church on Sunday, do you hear it or do you read about it in your bulletin? All of us read scripture, I'm sure. We wouldn't be here if we didn't. And recall what Jesus said about how we will be judged at the end of our life. What is our final exam? Jesus was not about guilt and punishment. So we've got another slide. It says our Catholic faith demands more of us than saying prayers and following laws. Catholic social principles are the moral compass as contemporary as Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and the description of God's criteria for judging us on the last day. This is a rich inheritance. This rich inheritance echoes God's call to make the reign of God real in our world. And I think an important line in there is that these this moral compass is always a new way to look at the gospel. The gospel never is, what I want to say, it never runs out of drawing us to live in our contemporary lives. There's always something in it that fits today, just as it fit, 1,000 years ago, but in a different way, and it fits our contemporary society. Our next slide is, what is the Catholic moral life? Our Catholic life, as I said before, demands more than saying prayers and following laws. And so these principles came to us through oral tradition. And, at the beginning, laws weren't written. The whole moral life was based on how the disciples, how the Christians followed what Jesus' life was all about. So what happened through the years is that pretty soon laws were made, and then we had truths to master, and pretty soon rules to follow, and sins to confess. Does that ring a bell for anybody? So anybody want to respond to that?
Well, Francine, I- I'll respond to that. That was all part of my growing up life before Vatican II. It was rules and regulations and sin this and sin that. So I don't know if that's exactly your question, but I certainly know what you're talking about.
Thank you, Rosemary. There's somebody else starting to talk. I don't know. And so, yes, Maritza?
I think someone else was just joining us, so I don't know. I think someone was just joining us. I don't think there's a
Oh,
comment.
okay. All right. So when we really think about it, a lot of this started back with the Hebrew prophets, talking about how we are to live a life and caring for each other. And so these principles are really, in a sense, going way, way back. It's just not that when Jesus came, they were all written in a book. Because if you remember, when Jesus first was in the temple, he talked about bringing glad tidings to the poor, proclaiming liberty to captives, giving sight to the blind, recovery, and he identified with the least of the people. He identified with a stranger. And so I read this line that really struck me. It says that Catholic social teaching is built on a commitment to the poor, and this commitment arises from our experiences of Christ in the Eucharist. I thought that was a pretty powerful statement. So if we receive Christ in the Eucharist, somehow we take on that persona, that image of who Jesus was in his day. That's who we should be in our day. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church explains, to receive in truth the body and blood of Christ given up for us, we must recognize Christ in the poorest, his brethren, his brothers and sisters. So Christian life is to be lived. Jesus didn't just say the Beatitudes, he lived them. He didn't just say, love God, love your neighbor. He did it. And, but no one was going around, saying, these are Catholic principles. You must live them. They learned by example. So in the early days of Catholicism, things were by word and example. And then, if you know anything about which most of us do, like back when many people were illiterate, a lot of the teaching was done by the windows in the churches. They spoke a story, and it was done by drama. They used to do drama before, right in the middle of Mass. And those things grew through the years. But later on, in 1891, there was the official adoption of what we call the Catechism. And so if you knew the questions and the answers, and you could say them, you were a very smart Catholic. Not necessarily if you lived them, but if you knew the answers. I have a women's group, a book study group, and it's interesting because we have talked about that so often in our group, how they even remember the whole thing about what they call the milk bottles. If you had a bottle of milk and it was white, you were really a good Catholic. If it had markings in it, or it was kind of gray, then that was sin. There was so much emphasis on sin and guilt. And let's look at slide 5. So Catholic social teaching, there it is, laws and rules, etc. But they are based on scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. Also in the year, interesting, in 1891, that was when the first encyclical was written by Pope Leo the 13th. And the reason for was the whole Industrial Revolution was coming along, and he saw how workers were being treated, and he thought something needs to be publicized. Some teaching needs to go out about how the dignity of work and workers, how they are treated. And so it's very interesting that in 1891 was the first official publication of the Catechism, but it was also the first publication of the encyclicals. And it's very interesting. We know which one got the most publicity. It wasn't Pope Leo's encyclical. It was the Catechism that became the marker for the Catholic faith. So then, after this came along Vatican II. And Vatican II, the emphasis of Pope John the 23rd was that we go from religion is what to whom, based on Jesus. Pope John said, it's time to throw open the windows. The world is bigger than that. And there was a call to get out of the church and to go out among the people. And so isolation became no longer possible. We went out into the public realm, and this was very threatening for a lot of people. Church structures, whom everybody thought would never change, or church rules, liturgical rules, suddenly it was almost like, not a turnaround, but it was a whole new way of looking at our faith. we went from Latin to English in the Mass. We went from into standing up for communion, into more singing by congregations, into talking about the whole thing that we are the light of the world. We are no longer to be isolated in our church. Then there was also the updating of theological anthropology. I know big words, but the whole idea about that was that we started to look at this whole idea about people are created equal, man and woman. Our bodies are sacraments of our souls. Grace is always and everywhere present. Everyone is made to be free. People are not disposable. If you're from another culture, another ethnic group, another area of the world, you are just as important as, or they are just as important as I am. That was another big thing. There was a whole liberation theology movement in Latin America about, taking care of the poor. This was very, very important. And another very big thing was that there was the empowering of conscience. Many of us grew up, I can't talk about everybody listening, but many of us grew up with this whole idea about the law is made, and even if you felt in your situation it couldn't be lived, there was guilt. But now there was this whole thing about what is conscience? What does that mean? And by empowering conscience, it simply means that there's a period of discernment. You talk with somebody who in community whom you respect as having a good solid background, theology background, and you make your decision accordingly. And I think most of us know this from documents like Humanae Vitae, for example. Sometimes in the whole, what do I want to say? Marriage annulments, etc. People just felt that this was the right thing to do, even though a law might have said that's difficult to understand, or no, it can't be this way. So empowering conscience was a really, really big thing that came out of Vatican II. We're going to go into some of the Catholic social principles, but before we do that, we have a gospel account of about the blind man Bartimaeus, and I'm wondering if I could have somebody volunteer to read that. I can't see everybody on my screen, so if somebody could just start reading it, I'd appreciate it.
As they left Jericho, a large crowd followed him. Now there were two blind men sitting at the side of the road. When they heard that it was Jesus who was passing by, they shouted, "Lord, have pity on us, Son of David." And the crowd scolded them and told them to be quiet, but they only shouted more loudly. Jesus stopped, calling them over and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Lord, let us have our sight back." Jesus felt pity for them and touched their eyes, and immediately their sight returned and they followed him.
Let's look at the next slide. Okay, can you look at those now in the context of that story about Bartimaeus? Yeah, I'm going to move back on that share screen and look at the first slide again of that gospel. I'm going to open this up for discussion. What do you see here? What was the crowd trying to do?
Looks to me like they're trying to not let anything take attention away from what Jesus is speaking. So the only thing they see as important is Jesus' word, and not the fact that he has pity on someone who is in need.
Thank you, Rosarita. Anybody else?
I guess it's always important to me to just remember that someone with a problem, someone with a physical condition needs help, but I don't always make the connection that that's Jesus calling out for sympathy or empathy, or that's a spiritual agonizing that we don't often say. Nobody says, well, help me, Jesus, and all of that. But it's a call to me to recognize the spiritual part of the physical condition, the social condition, the problem.
Thank you. You think they were embarrassed?
It's hard for me to wrap my mind around embarrassment. I don't quite figure that out. I think the one who's calling out is embarrassed, but the people shouting at him saying, be quiet, I can't wrap my head around why would they feel that way? I don't really know.
Well, I think sometimes if you look back on their day too, if you had some kind of an ailment, sometimes it was because of sin. And so it was like, you don't be bothering Jesus because we are better here. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then if you go to the second part of that, it said that Jesus reached out and touched them, right? And then he told them to go on. I think it's a whole nother thing about Jesus recognizing them and touching them. Again, this whole idea of touch. If you could take this particular gospel and translate it into today, how would that fit? Who's getting pushed away? Who needs to be touched?
Francine, I think again, so many of us would say, get somebody else to help. Go get a doctor. Go get the policeman or whatever else. We don't step out in our own spiritual way of comfort and consolation. We really fail, I think, so many times. Oh, I can't get involved. Blah blah blah. It's what I kind of feel like might happen today.
Mm-hmm. But what happens when Jesus does touch them? Then they get healed. And think today, how many people need to be touched to be healed?
Well, and after they were touched, they followed Jesus after he healed
Good point.
them.
Right, Joanne? Yeah, I said Jesus felt pity for them and he touched their eyes and immediately their sight returned and they followed him. So I think it just goes to show that even in the little ways that we reach out to people who are on the fringes or the edge, whatever we want to call it, that these people are touched by not only physically, but spiritually. We can also touch people's lives. So, that statement, all social problems are spiritual problems. I think that in all social problems or moral problems, I mean, look at our world today. Where does it all start from and where is it ending? It doesn't look like it's ending, but anyway. Okay, let's look at the next slide. You can't see it very well, but it says what you see depends on where you are standing. And I think that is so true. If there's any grounding principle in when we talk about Catholic social principles, it's the one that everybody is made in the image and likeness of God. The whole foundation is human dignity, and we're going to go through some of these principles. But basically, what they all come down to is respecting everyone, because everyone is made in the image and likeness of God. No matter where they started from, no matter what state they are in, etc. Everyone is made in the image and likeness of God. So, to be human is to be social, and to be human is to be sacred. And we automatically, we make judgments and we measure actions by how people help or harm human dignity. Think how, listening to the media today, how many people are harmed just by words that are said, just by the way people are put down made fun of, not considered to be worthy of recognition. It's a sad situation. Okay, so let's look at the Catholic social principles. Some people say they're 4, some people say they're 7, some people say they're 11. And it doesn't matter the number. As I said before, the life and dignity of the human person is probably the basis of all of them. And but for our purposes here, I think most people bring them down to 7. So that's kind of tonight what I did, put them into the 7. So we're going to start with the life and dignity of the human person, and then solidarity, and then care for creation, and then the option for the poor, the call for family, community, and participation, the rights and responsibilities, that's of everybody, and then also the dignity of work. Okay, so we're going to start with number 1, the rights and dignity of the human person. Jesus said, I came that they may have life and have it to the full. When we think about everybody and we say, do they have life to the full? We live in a very producer, consumer kind of society today. I was reading the other day that if everybody on the earth, everybody in the United States, our lifestyle, if everybody could live that, it would take 6 planet Earths for everybody to live the same kind of lifestyle we do, which to me was really amazing. It'd take the resources of 6 planet Earths if everybody lived the lifestyle that we in the US do. And yet we read from scripture, everyone is made in God's image and likeness. Marcus Meshner, who's a professor at Xavier University in Cincinnati, said he teaches the ethics of encounter and Catholic social principles. He said on the first day of his class, he has his students take a black magic marker and write on their hand, very good. So every time that they look at their hand during that day, they see very good. And he said, because so many people have such a poor self-image, and yet we are all made in the image and likeness of God. And that we spend far too much time talking about original sin instead of original blessing. That we are made in the image and likeness of God. That came first. So original blessing should be our priority, not mostly talking about original sin. We're going to watch a video now on the rights and dignity of the human person. And you might jot a note if you wish, because we're going to talk about these a little later. Like, what strikes you in that video? So, excuse me. So we'll begin here with video number 1 on the rights and dignity of the human person. Oops.
Children bear the image of their parents both physically and psychologically and spiritually. So in all those ways, they are representative, if you want, of their parents. So in a similar way, all of us, children of God, represent God. We bear the likeness of God. So every human being, all have a purpose, a mission. They're part of God's plan.
At the root of our dignity is this right to life. And the right to life extends from conception to natural death. It applies to us across the whole of our existence. And so to have an ethic of life means that at all times the church is concerned for how people are doing at any given moment.
When we see people trying to justify treating other people in a certain way because they're so small, they're not born yet, they're not self-aware yet, their skin is another color, they're so disabled. Whenever we see people being spoken of more like objects, then we know that the principle of the radical equality of every human person is being violated.
The human race is a family. We're all children of God. And so we should learn that lesson from individual families, that there's no one who's expendable. Everyone is worthy of reverence and protection, but especially the weakest among us.
Our dignity also cries out for the freedom and the opportunity to become everything God intended us to be. So part of life, part of fulfilling life, part of serving life, is actually creating the opportunities for everyone to have the fullness of life.
I think Catholic social teaching urges us to operate at both the kind of individual and the global levels. Both the individual who's in immediate need, so think of the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. At the same time, we have to be attentive to the more global, the more societal violations of justice. There is systemic violence, there is systemic injustice. That has to be addressed too.
So it's not just the lawmakers, but national institutions, corporations, have this obligation to affirm the principle of the right to life and dignity, and then to decide how their institution can go about realizing it. On a personal level, it requires figuring out how you, and often this is the most effective level, at the one-on-one level, at the small group level, can make a difference, and in realizing those parts of human dignity that are in short supply and that you have the wherewithal to do something about.
All of the church's social teaching, its understanding of family, of community life, of justice, of good governance, all of this comes back to the question, what will fulfill life for every human being as God has intended it?
Someone said that God has an infinite explosion of love for every person. I'm going to repeat that. God has an infinite explosion of love for every person. We are God's partners, not God's puppets. And Pope Francis says, we need a revolution of tenderness. We're going to look at slide number 16. I think that's something for us to think about. It really struck me when I saw that quote. We're going to look at one more video right now, and then we'll have a break. And then when we come back from the break, we'll have some discussion on these two principles. The next principle is the principle of solidarity. And the slide itself shows people joining hands. And solidarity means that everybody has something to share. Bishop Desmond Tutu, I like a story about him. Someone said to him, you know, he was known for his outstanding work, and somebody said to him, well, I can't do anything. He said, I'm not like you. I don't have all your gifts and talents, etc. And he said, you know, the world is like a symphony. He said, and everyone has a part to play. And this person said, yeah, but he said, I don't even have any musical talent when you think about a symphony. And Archbishop Tutu said, everybody can play a triangle. You know, so everybody can do something. So if we say we have nothing to contribute, people need to be encouraged. Saying nothing we have to contribute is like a cop-out for us. Because Vatican II says everyone is called to holiness. We all have a unique vocation. And do we look people in the eye, like when we're in a grocery store or a homeless person? One homeless person said, how would you like to, for 24 hours a day, have nobody looking at you straight in the eye? Then you begin to feel like you're not worth anything. And I think a lot of people feel like that. Okay, so let's watch the another little video on solidarity, and then I'll give you a break.
Okay, and I'm just gonna clarify here. I'm not sure I can get there, but I'm gonna try here for a minute. So hang on.
Do you want us to take a break, Colleen?
Yeah, that might be good because I'm having a
Okay.
little bit of trouble getting the next video up. So it might be a good time right now, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay.
So let's take a break till 7 o'clock.
Okay. Thank you
It's
so
like
much.
10 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Solidarity is based on our common belief that everything was created by God, and so all creatures are related to one another in this one beautiful community called creation.
Solidarity is, first of all, perhaps what is not. It's more than just a feeling. Solidarity is a commitment for the welfare of the other one. When we see each other as my brother, my sister, wherever they are, regardless of race, nationalities, belief, we are one human family.
It's being able to reach out to someone and for them to know that you truly care about them, that you're touched by their experience and they're touched by yours. It isn't one where we do something for someone, but we do it with them, and that we grow together to be closer.
One of the scripture passages that illustrate for me the principle of solidarity is St. Paul's image of the body of Christ. When one part of the body suffers, the whole body suffers. When one part of the body rejoices, the whole body rejoices.
Being church, body of Christ, means that we are not only connected to Christ, but that connectedness to Christ means we are connected also to the very mission of Christ, which is a mission of solidarity. And so the body of Christ must be attentive to the contemporary ways by which the human person is really trampled upon.
I'm very lucky to witness some of the great works that the church does overseas through religious orders, through dioceses, through bishops' conferences. We work through that network of the church throughout the world to reach the poorest of the poor.
Solidarity means I am always in relationship, not only with myself, but with God and with everyone that God loves, especially the poor. But if I am in solidarity, I would also try to go to the roots of what makes people suffer. And I would be willing, as an act of solidarity, to do what I can, according to my state of life, my expertise, to help solve those things too.
Yes, we are very busy people. We need to be very clear on our priorities. When we love someone, will take steps to express that love and will prioritize that person. So if we have our priorities clear, we'll have time to pray, first of all, because prayer always is going to lead us to action.
We have this wonderful tool, social media. We have social communications, we have television, we have internet. No one now can claim that he or she has not received any information about what's happening in other parts of the world.
Awareness will lead us to action. This action could take place at a local level with advocacy and also with our finances, our resources.
If we could have greater solidarity throughout the world, I think that would be the peaceful place. That would be the place where, frankly, the Lord has wanted us to come to create that greater kingdom on earth.
Okay, let's share some thoughts that came from these two videos, the one on the rights and dignity of the human person and this one on solidarity. They pretty well fit together. So any comments or questions, observations? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Well, it seems like we have a lot of solidarity, but it's all in pockets. We're really, we're really in solidarity with all kinds of people, but it's almost in solidarity together against somebody else. And it seems like it's very difficult to break out of those silos or whatever they are, to look at other people. And so it seems like it's quite an uphill battle and challenge and struggle.
Thank you. One of the questions that was asked on the solidarity is what makes people suffer? What kind of solidarity do you see? I know there's a lot of media today, but what kind of good do you see happening where there is solidarity? Think of even some places in the world, if you can't think of it in your own locality.
Well, I think of that guy, that chef who feeds people all over the world. You know, he's gotten food to Gaza when governments are trying to do something, and he's got it in there. I mean, and he feeds people, he's feeding people in Haiti. That guy has a sense of solidarity that,
Right.
he's trying to feed people. And sometimes that, oftentimes like when there's storms, you hear people talk about how everybody comes out and helps. I mean, that's a great sign of solidarity. I think that's very, very evident. So I've seen as well.
Right. Thank you.
I've seen it here in Dodge City, especially with migrants coming to town. The refugees. We have Haitians, right now, a bunch of Haitians, but we've had Cubans, all sorts of different migrants coming to town. And I simply put out on social media, I was trying to help collect furniture and whatnot. And it's quite surprising. There's people that helped or gave, I mean, they were cleaning out their basement, so I don't know how altruistic it was, but certainly people did, they came together to support these folks that didn't have anything. It was edifying for me.
Thank you. I think also, just think what Catholic Charities is doing here in the Diocese of Dodge City, and I'm sure in the Salina Diocese too, that Catholic Charities is doing a lot for people. But I think sometimes it's so sad that there has to be a crisis before people come together. I think that's what's sad.
I think, Father, you were right on the part about the most times when we see solidarity is when it's in a time of a tragedy, and it comes in waves at the very beginning, and then it just seems to pull back and die off. But a lot of times people stop seeing the need, and that's when the solidarity begins to break down.
Good point, Debbie. Thank you. When you were talking, I was also thinking about how often that happens when people lose a loved one in death. You know, everybody comes around at the first couple of days, but the people grieve for longer than 3 days, you know, kind of are left on their own.
This is just a little thing, but our priest, Father Tim, we always have had a children's collection where the little ones toddle up with their money that they want to put in the basket, and it just went in general collection. And he started talking about the need for water wells in some of the countries, and now that money is being used for that, and telling the children where their money is going and what they're doing with it.
Thank you, Joanne. I think sometimes too, when people know stories or they know somebody connected with a place, it gives another whole connection. I think another good point on the solidarity was where he talked about where we have to reach, because the world has gotten smaller because of technology. You know, how do we influence on a broader scale? How do we advocate for people who have no voice? And how important that is. And I think about elections, for example. We have a lot of influence if people can just come together to do it and advocate for people, for others who have less than we do. Anybody else have a comment?
I guess what I was thinking of, that was part of my experience growing up as a child, that it seemed like farmers always helped farmers. They didn't necessarily be in a crisis. They didn't necessarily have to go out begging, but there was always that concern for their neighbor, because whether it was food or whether it was an implement that they went. And as we become larger and larger in families and businesses, it seems like there's been so much striving to be better than the other person instead of caring for the other person. And I don't know how we enter into that arena other than continuing to show our love, which was expressed in that solidarity that Christ, God has an explosion of love for all of us. And I think the more we are suffering, the more we see what's going on in the world, the more it's going to draw us to care. Because I just don't think we like what we're seeing, we like what we're hearing. And so maybe that's going to bring us to our knees and saying, this world can be better. It was better at one time. And I just pray that I can continue to manifest some kind of love for others by helping them believe in themselves.
Thank you, Rosemary. All right, let's move on to our next video, which is Care for Creation. I think one thing we need to remember when we talk about creation is that when God made everything, he saw that it was good. And I think what's happened to so many people in so many parts of the world is how we translated that first part of Genesis where we say God gave them dominion. That's not the really true translation. Is God gave us stewardship, not dominion, over creation, that we take care of creation. And if Pope Francis in 2015 wrote the encyclical Laudato Si, and then he followed up this past year with Laudate Deum, both on the climate. And, you know, if we don't have a world, we can forget about everything else. If we don't have good air, good water, good food, if we don't have animals and insects and trees and etc., nothing else is going to matter because there won't be life. Life can't be sustained that way. So we're going to watch the video Care for Creation.
So here's a little thought experiment. Imagine that I spent a lot of time making a gift for you, or spent a lot of time shopping for it, and I wrapped it up and gave it to you with a great deal of intention, and then you ended up stepping on it or throwing it out. How do you think that would make me feel? Well, that's essentially the idea behind caring for creation. God has given us this beautiful and gracious gift, and it's up to us to care for it and to respect it and to reverence it for the gift that it is.
When we care for the environment, we care for the bounty of the Lord. And that bounty is given to every one of us, not just some of us, but every one of us to enjoy and to sustain our needs.
The support system of human life. That's what the environment turns out to be. It's what produces food, the air to breathe, the water or the rain to fall and to water. Our life is so bound with creation that we're bound to respect it if it is also to serve us.
Because creation is a gift from God, we're asked to steward it. The book of Genesis asks us to keep and till the natural world. And sadly, we've done a very good job tilling it, but not such a great job keeping it.
When creation suffers, it hurts most the poorest of people. Poor people generally have to depend so much more on the water, on the climate, because that's how they make their livings. They are very vulnerable to climate change. Think about farmers. If there is a 2 or 3 degrees increase in temperature, then people cannot grow the same thing in the same area. So the care for creation translates directly into the care for our brothers and sisters.
Laudato Si calls all of us to care for the natural world. Now the call and how we live it out depends on who we are. If we're a young person, it may mean something as simple as recycling or consuming less. If we're an adult, it may mean making decisions in our corporation and at our workplace that affect the environment in a more positive way, and especially making decisions that take into account the needs of the poor.
Caring for creation, it calls for a certain kind of a unity or reciprocal relationship between man and his environment. We receive the earth as a garden. It will be very unfair if we pass on the earth as a wilderness.
Thank you, Colleen. Any thoughts from that video, that presentation? What do you see in your area that you say we're not doing a very good job of taking care of it? Anyone?
I was struck today by something I was reading in the local newspaper, which only comes out 3 times a week now. And it was talking about the amount of underwater water under the ground down in our aquifer system. And it just seemed to say, well, whatever we're doing is okay. And just reporting on how much it had gone down, how much in wetter seasons it had come back up again. But it seemed like there was nothing saying we need to care for it. We need to conserve it as much as possible. It was just there like news without any kind of admonition or saying, hey, great that you're using less of us, that kind of thing.
Yeah, good point, Rosarita. I think there's even a book out called now, I know it has a windmill on the front of it, something about soon there won't be any water in western Kansas. I mean, basically, that's what it says. Yeah.
I was just going to share that. I was thinking on the same vein about water, because sometimes I drive around during like being out here in Hayes. I've grown up with water conservation, turn off the water while you're brushing your teeth, just do little things even that help. And then I'll drive around in the middle of summer and it's 105 degrees and people are watering their fescue grass. And it's just not, for me, it's difficult because I think our water is being depleted because of our vanity. And I'm probably the opposite side of that. I have weeds in my yard, but I do think there's a good balance to be found that would respect the earth and others, those who come after us.
Thank you, Jenna.
I think the chemicals and the way our farming has changed is playing a role in that one too, because in our quest to produce more by fewer people, we've reverted to not the standard farming practices, but to spray rigs. And how much of that is going into our water system everywhere, not just here, but the high levels of nitrogen and then what it's doing to the people that drink that. That is probably one of the major concerns I have. Of course, pollution also is too, but the pollution of our water by us is a concern.
Thank you, Debbie. I thought it was interesting in the Great Bend paper on Sunday, there was an article about the pollution, the use of resources, etc., in keeping a lawn. And you water and then you mow, and then you use leaf blowers, and it was very fascinating. I thought the whole idea of that, but there's also the whole thing about who's suffering from the climate change are the poor. It's the poor who, the water is rising, on the coastlines, etc. I know when I was in Louisiana, we went out to this area where most of the people it's a French area, had to move away because the water has almost completely flooded their whole living area. I think there's probably about 10 people left in that whole area, but it's been completely flooded because of the rise in the water. And then you have the oceans, warming, etc. Yeah. I think sometimes God must look on us and say, will they ever catch on? I don't know. So we probably could talk about water, about the environment for a long, long time, but I think it's always good to look at, who are suffering because of it. Most of you know this, but my sister's in Nigeria, and they work with farmers, and they have done studies where they do some of the quote Western kind of fertilizing, etc. And they do the natural farming, and the production from the natural farming is better than from what they've done with chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And they're just trying to teach the people, do what is more natural. It's healthier for everybody. Okay, Colleen, can you try one more, you think? We trust you.
Do you want another video? Are you sure? No. Do you want the next video then?
Try it.
Okay. All right.
It's the last one, so you don't.
I've got my friend Eric here. We're good. He can get us out of anything.
Okay.
All right. I'm just gonna do this way.
Your screen's sharing. Stop share. Stop it.
Stop share.
Before we understand Jesus is preferential.
Okay, now what I gotta do?
Stop share.
Okay.
And
What's
then we're going to share it again.
Okay. Do this.
Before we understand Jesus' preferential option for the poor, we have to understand God's preferential option for the poor. God incarnates himself as Jesus among a poor family in a poor village, and Jesus himself preaches among the poor and preaches about the poor.
This is how God is. He is a God who had a special love for those who had no one to turn to. Not because they're righteous, not because they're the most holy and most saintly, but because they are in need. And God comes to their rescue.
In Matthew 25, Christ tells us, "Whatsoever you do for the least of my brothers and sisters, you do unto me." And it's such a beautiful reminder for us that the people we serve who are in poverty, who are in need, are in fact the face of Christ. And because of that, have so much to teach us.
So when we go to encounter the poor, let us encounter them as a fellow poor person. Not from a perspective of superiority where they're in the dark, I'm in the light, all of these things. No, I grow in my own humanity when I encounter the person of the poor.
Who are the poor in our society? The poor are those people who are really, really marginalized amongst us. The most vulnerable. Those who are forgotten in society.
Here in America, I don't think anyone can say, well, I do not know what's happening in those other parts of the world. But it's not enough to know. We should allow what we see, what we hear and know really touch us. And for us to have that mindset, I may be an American, the person who just lost his whole family is from Syria. But at this point of suffering, we are one.
The preferential option for the poor calls us to address both immediate needs and systemic problems, to look both at the person in front of us and to give them what they need in that moment, but also to say, why is this person in this place? What has happened in our society? What are the larger issues at work, and how can we address those larger issues?
When we see the situations to which the poor are subjected, dehumanizing, humiliating, you could say that those situations manifest the lack of love. Lack of love from other people, lack of love from society, for they did not choose to be poor. They are made poor by others and by systems and structures and society.
In our political lives, in our economic lives, in our social lives, whatever we do, we should always put the poor first.
People try to make caring for the poor out to be something very difficult or complicated or hard to understand. It's not. It basically means a few things. First of all, being charitable to the poor, giving to organizations that care for the poor, giving directly to the poor. It means loving the poor as our brothers and sisters. It means coming to know them, touching them, holding them, shaking their hands, and really physically coming in contact with them, because otherwise, how would we show our love?
What a shame if a community claims to be the bearer of the good news, for that community not to live it, not to embody it. No? And so we ask the question, no? If the church will not do it, then who else will?
Would anybody like to make any comments? Maybe I'll ask this question. How many of you have actually physically been to areas where everybody is poor? Rosemary, you were, weren't you?
Yes,
On the
Francine.
spot, I know.
Yeah. Did you want me to comment
Yes,
on?
go ahead. Sure.
Yeah. I was over there for 6 months working among the poor and with the Dominican sisters that are over there who had a school and a hospital, but really the hospital was out in the field, so to speak. You had to almost walk to the area. Well, the people did, where the nurses would go and try to reach out to them, especially those with children that were having babies or had had a baby. And some farmer there provided a little shelter for them to have a little bit of privacy when we worked there. And the education, what the sisters are doing there has been very helpful with the government. They've been accepted, so they have their schools that they help to teach. But the little children, they called it a barefoot school, where the children would all come just as they were, just kind of ragged and tattered, and they were learning. In that area is where they were learning to speak English, because that was the second language that they were helping them with. And So it was quite an eye opener for me. Fortunately, I was, let me just give you a little laughter, a little fun trivia. When they would walk to school, I would sit on the bench and watch them come up the dirt road, and they'd come right over to me, and they all wanted to touch my hair. And they got so fascinated that I had this blonde kind of straight hair. So they took turns, and then I took turns reaching out to them and touch their little black curly hair. So we had a little excitement about that.
Rosemary, how did that change you? Or did it? The experience?
I'm sorry, what, Francine?
How did it change you to have that experience?
Well, see, I knew our sisters had been in Nigeria for a long time, and I always said they came back. And when I'd meet any of those sisters that'd been in Nigeria, I thought they had something I had never experienced. So that was one reason I signed up to go over there. And how it changed me was that I just grew in my understanding that they are happy people, but happy with nothing much. And, I learned from that. I thought, I don't have to have everything. I can be happy with what I've got. And that really enlightened me.
Thank you. Anybody else? I think a great thing that some parishes do for their young people and adults sponsors is, go to areas where they can really be of service and help people, and they find out that they get as much, the people in those areas give as much as those with material resources can give. Am I making sense? Like you said, we don't go with everything. The people we go to always give back to us also. And I think that's what's really important, that we're not experts. Yeah. Anybody else care to share anything? Well, we have a few more principles, and I know we're not going to have the videos for them, but I think, Colleen, you sent out the link for slides, and if you want to watch the rest of the videos on the principles, the rights and responsibilities of the family, community, and participation, and the dignity of work and rights of workers, like there are 3 more, you can always watch them, and they are very, very good. They're short, they're to the point, and they make a very good point. In this, the rights and responsibilities, and the family and community, I think there's several points I just want to make. Richard Rohr says, we become the God we worship. And I think if people worship money, that becomes their God. If they worship, have power, prestige, and privilege, as we say, that's kind of the God that's worshipped. And then Anthony de Mello says, behold God, beholding you and smiling. So I think there's something beautiful about that. And so that's who we are. And another quote from Dorothy Day, my love for God is only as great as my love for the person I love the least. That's really a toughie, I think. And I know a lot of sacrifices families make for their own children. But at the same time, we think about, I'm talking about here in the States, where people are well-to-do. But when you think about how many children, even today, are dying because they don't have food, like in Haiti. We hear in Gaza that children under 2 are dying because they don't have the proper food, etc. And yet you have people like Elon Musk paying how many millions of dollars for somebody to go up into space for 10 minutes. So there's such a disparity between the very rich and the very, very poor. And then we also have the dignity and right of workers, like people should be paid what they're worth to be paid. They said since the pandemic, the number of billionaires in the world has doubled. It's hard to believe. Since the pandemic, the number of billionaires in the world has doubled. So there's so much to learn. Anyway, it's coming to the end of our evening together, and I was wondering if you have any comments you would like to make. Anybody?
Well, Francine, I do think that you've enlightened us about these different social principles. And I'm always of the idea that, now what do I do with this? Where do I go with it? How do I proclaim it to the world, or how do I live it? And so you've given me much food for thought.
Thank you. I was even thinking, Palm Sunday is coming up. And if you were asked to preach for this Sunday reading, which is Jesus going into Jerusalem, how would you fit that into Catholic social teaching? Might have to think about that for a while.
I have a thought regarding the conversation at the beginning with the first video, and we had spoke about
sure.
How people gather around a crisis, and then the attention it deserves just wanes and waxes. And I don't know, is that a bad thing or is that a natural thing? Because we're all creatures of habits, and it's kind of like a billboard that you pass by every day. You see it the first day and you see it the second day, and then after that you don't notice it anymore. I'm not sure what to make of this, but I wonder if it's just not a byproduct of us just being very human, for us to give attention when attention is due, and then after the moment has passed, we go back to the very ordinary parts of our lives rather than focusing on the extraordinary, which would be a tragedy or maybe a wedding or something like that, where you have this glamorous event. But then, you go back to the ordinary, which is kind of like the church. We have ordinary time, which is a whole lot of just everyday rinse, wash, repeat. So I don't know. I just wonder if it's not a human thing. It's a byproduct of us being human, and to be forgiven for that humanness. Does that make any sense at all?
I think so, Eric. Thank you. I think there's a part of when you were talking, I was thinking, unless you're really in the situation, let's say, for example, we were talking about when there's a natural disaster, people come around to work. And there's a big influx of people at the beginning, and then it sort of wanes off. But if you're actually living there and maybe you haven't received the damage on your property that somebody else has, that you keep working and you keep helping because you're actually in a situation. I don't know. Maybe it is natural.
Well, I think a lot of that is if something is out of sight, it's out of mind. We hear it on the news in the evening about what is happening in Haiti right now, but yet it's so far removed from us. We go on about our own lives, and yes, we still think of Haiti or talk about Haiti, but I guess we feel what would our role be in helping Haiti at this point?
Thank you, Debbie. I think the same thing.
I agree, Eric. It's also human nature too. And unless we have a way of that constantly being brought back to us, it's easy for us to let it go.
I was thinking, it was like Ukraine too. That was in the news, and then Gaza was in the news, and now it's Haiti in the news. And then some of the other slips back unless you're not watching a lot of news, or you're not on BBC or something like that. Yeah. Did anybody get one more thought about the gospel for Sunday? The one thought came to my mind was, everybody likes it when it's happy and there's a parade, but then when it comes time to for the sacrifice, then you, like Father Bob said earlier, there's a different kind of solidarity. Crucify him versus Hosanna, and then it's crucify. But yeah. Anyway. Well, I want to thank you all for your evening. Blessings to all of you, and we all do what we are called to do, right? So I'd like to end with a prayer. Sometimes it's called the Oscar Romero prayer, but it really wasn't written by him. It was written by Bishop Ken Untner. But I'm just going to read the last part of it as the closing prayer for tonight. And I wish you all a very blessed Holy Week, and write on your hand, very good. Very good. So this is the prayer. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and do it well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for God's grace to enter and to do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future, not our own. Amen. God bless. Good night.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Sister Francine. Good night,
You're welcome,
everyone.
Colleen. Thank you.
Thank you, Francine. Colleen.
Thank you.
Thank you.